Look, if you thought this off-season was uneventful, without much excitement, maybe it's time to take another look more closely. Because, in reality, there's a lot happening behind the scenes that completely changes how you see this team for next season. It's not about impactful plays or huge headlines. It's about fit, depth, and, above all, internal competition. And that's where things start to get really interesting. There's competition for key positions, players wanting to prove their worth, open space for people who can surprise. And that changes everything when the season starts. Sometimes, it's not the most hyped team that gives trouble. It's the one that arrives organized, hungry, and with several options ready to emerge. Now tell me, do you also feel that this team can surprise more than many people are expecting? Or are you still hesitant? Comment below and leave a like to support us. Something shifted inside the Minnesota Vikings, and if you blinked during free agency, you might have missed just how dramatically this roster has been reshaped without the noise of blockbuster headlines. Because beneath the surface, behind the quiet off-season narrative, there's a team forming that looks very different from what we saw 12 months ago. And it starts in the most important room in football. We're talking about a quarterback situation that is far from settled, even if many fans think they already know the answer. Kyler Murray currently sits at QB1, and yes, his presence instantly elevates the entire offense. But here's where things get interesting. McCarthy is not just sitting back and waiting. He is actively in competition. That's not speculation. That's the reality inside the building. And while Carson Wentz was brought in, it's not to replace that battle. It's to prevent a repeat of last season's chaos, when instability at quarterback forced the Vikings into survival mode week after week. Kevin O'Connell has seen what happens when depth collapses, and this time he made sure it won't happen again. And if you're thinking this is just a formality, and Kyler has the job locked, maybe. But the fact that this competition even exists tells you everything about how Minnesota is approaching 2026. No assumptions, no guarantees, only performance. Now shift your attention to the backfield, where one of the biggest surprises of the offseason quietly unfolded. Aaron Jones is back. That wasn't expected, not even close, and yet here we are, looking at a backfield that now includes Jones, Jordan Mason, and developmental pieces behind them. But let's be real for a second. This is still one of the weaker running back groups in the league on paper. The intrigue lies in potential. Jordan Mason continues to be viewed internally as a player with untapped upside, someone who could take on a larger role as the season progresses. And don't be surprised if the Vikings add another name through the draft, possibly targeting value in the mid to late rounds, or even earlier if a prospect like Emmett Johnson rises on their board. Then comes the wide receiver room, and this is where things subtly changed in a way that could have a major ripple effect. Jalen Nailor is gone, now with the Raiders, and that opens the door for a new WR3. But here's the key. In this offense, that third receiver role might be one of the easiest starting jobs in the NFL. Why? Because you're lining up next to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Defenses are forced to focus elsewhere, leaving that third option in favorable one-on-one matchups almost every snap. The expectation right now is internal development, Ty Felton being the next man up. But the door is wide open for a draft pick to come in and compete immediately. And if you're a Vikings fan, this is where you should start leaning in a little closer, because the offense as a whole, it's not just solid. It's quietly becoming one of the most balanced units in the conference. The tight end group remains stable, led by T.J. Hawkinson, who returns on a restructured deal. But make no mistake, this could be his final year in Minnesota. That alone introduces a layer of urgency to evaluate the future at the position. Josh Oliver continues to be one of the best blocking tight ends in the league, and younger players like Gavin Bartholomew are expected to take a step forward after setbacks. Still, the draft looms as a very real avenue for reinforcements. Up front, the offensive line might be the most reassuring unit on this team. Christian Darrisaw and Brian O'Neill anchor the tackles, Donovan Jackson and Will Freeze solidify the interior, and Blake Brandel is currently projected at center. Add in depth like Van Demark as a swing tackle, and suddenly this group feels both stable and flexible. Even if the Vikings draft a center, there's no immediate pressure. This is a unit built to evolve as the season unfolds. So when you step back and look at the offense as a whole, here's the real takeaway. This is a group without glaring weaknesses, but full of internal battles that could define the ceiling of the entire team. Quarterback competition, WR3 uncertainty, running back potential. These aren't problems. They're pressure points that could unlock something bigger. And that's exactly what makes this version of the Vikings so dangerous heading into 2026. Now, I want to hear from you. Based on everything you're seeing with this offensive setup, especially the quarterback battle and the WR3 situation, do you believe this unit is good enough to carry the team deep this season? Or is there still one move missing? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because in the next part, we're diving into the defense. And that's where things get even more interesting. And this is where the conversation about the Minnesota Vikings takes a sharp turn. Because if you thought the offense had subtle intrigue, the defense is where the real debate begins. Not because it's falling apart, but because what looks like a weakness on the surface might actually be one of the biggest misconceptions surrounding this team right now. Let's start with the defensive line, specifically the interior. On paper, the Vikings lost Javon Hargrave and Jonathan Allen, two names that immediately trigger concern if you're just scanning headlines. But here's what most people outside the building are missing. When this defense was playing its best football late last season, those two were not the driving force. They were rotational pieces. The engine of that defensive surge came from within, from players who are still here. Jalen Redmond, for example, isn't just a solid contributor. He's being talked about internally and around the league as one of the most underrated defensive tackles in football. There are coaches who looked at Minnesota's tape and came away saying he was the best player on that defense. That's not hype. That's evaluation from opposing staffs. And next to him, Levi Drake Rodriguez showed flashes that suggest he's ready to take another step forward. Add in players like Taki Taimani, who quietly impressed during the preseason. And suddenly, this weakened unit starts to look more like an ascending group with continuity and upside. Does that mean they're done adding? Not at all. Expect the Vikings to target another defensive tackle in the draft. But not out of desperation, out of strategy. Now, if there's one position group on this entire roster that leaves zero room for doubt, it's the edge rushers. This group isn't just good. It's overloaded. Andrew Van Ginkel continues to redefine what it means to be a hybrid defender, doing everything from rushing the passer to dropping into coverage like a linebacker. Jonathan Greenard has already established himself as a top-tier edge presence. And then there's Dallas Turner, who, somehow, is currently buried on the depth chart despite having the talent to demand a massive snap share. And that creates a fascinating problem for Brian Flores. How do you distribute snaps among three players who all deserve to be on the field? Because this isn't a rotation where you're trying to hide someone, this is a rotation where you're trying to maximize everyone. Turner needs development reps, but Van Ginkel and Greenard are too impactful to take off the field. The solution might not be traditional rotation at all. It might be creativity. Formations that allow multiple edge players to attack simultaneously, forcing offenses into impossible matchups. At linebacker, things settle down a bit, but not without questions. Blake Cashman remains a cornerstone, a player who consistently delivers. Eric Wilson returns on a significant deal, reinforcing the middle of the defense. But depth becomes the concern here. Ivan Pace Jr., despite flashes, is not a lock to make the roster, and behind the starters, there's a noticeable drop-off. This is another area where the draft could play a key role, especially if the Vikings decide to invest in a player who can contribute early while developing into a larger role. Then we get to the secondary, and this might be the most quietly improved unit on the entire team. The addition of James Pierre changes everything about how you evaluate this group. Suddenly, the Vikings aren't relying on just one or two corners. They have three legitimate starting-caliber players. Byron Murphy continues to hold down the CB1 role, even if he's not in that elite lockdown tier. Isaiah Rodgers brings inconsistency, yes, but also flashes of high-level play that can swing games when he's on. And Pierre? He might be one of the most overlooked additions of the offseason across the entire league. This isn't a flashy secondary. It's not built on star power. It's built on depth, flexibility, and reliability. Three things that matter more over the course of a long season than one elite name. And then there's special teams, which might sound like an afterthought until you realize this is arguably the strongest unit on the entire roster. Johnny Hecker, a four-time All-Pro. Will Reichard, coming off a first-team All-Pro season. Andrew DePaula, a two-time All-Pro long snapper. That level of consistency in the third phase of the game is not just a bonus, it's a weapon. Even in the return game, despite some inconsistency, there's production there with Miles Price. So when you put it all together, offense, defense, special teams, this Minnesota Vikings team doesn't scream dominance. It doesn't have that one headline move that makes the rest of the league panic. But what it does have is structure, depth, internal competition, and a coaching staff that understands exactly how to use it. There are no glaring must-fix holes. Outside of maybe safety and adding depth at defensive tackle, this is a roster that can genuinely go in any direction during the draft. Best player available isn't just a strategy, it's a luxury. And that's the biggest takeaway here. This team didn't need to win the offseason to position itself to win during the season. Now it's your turn. After breaking down both sides of the ball, do you believe this Vikings roster is truly ready to compete at the highest level? Or are they one key piece away from being a real contender? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more deep dives like this, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. Go Vikings!